What if Adam was not the first? What if before the man formed from the dust of the ground, there were already beings who stood in the very presence of God, who rejoiced at the foundations of the earth, and who bore a title that still echoes with mystery, the sons of God? The Bible hints at them in fragments, scattered across verses that most readers skim past, never realizing that hidden within those words is the suggestion of a world before Eden, a creation older than Adam, and a story that reframes the very purpose of humanity. The shocking claim is this: Adam was not the beginning, but a continuation. The so-called sons of God existed before him, woven into the fabric of creation itself, standing as witnesses to the birth of the cosmos and perhaps even participating in its order. If true, this would shake our understanding of Genesis, revealing that humanity is not the first chapter in God's story but a new chapter written after a previous one had already begun. And here lies the mysterious connection. These sons of God are not mere angels, not simply celestial spectators, and certainly not metaphorical. They appear again and again across Scripture, sometimes as divine council members in Job, sometimes as rebellious figures in Genesis 6, and sometimes as radiant beings still standing in the heavenly court in Revelation. Their story stretches across time, hinting that before Adam walked in Eden, another order of beings bore the image of God's intent, and their rise and fall set the stage for humanity's own drama. The Book of Job gives us one of the clearest glimpses. In Job 38, when God confronts Job with the mystery of creation, he declares that the foundations of the earth were laid when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Notice what this implies. Before Adam, before the first man and woman, before the serpent entered Eden, there were already voices raised in jubilation at the birth of the world. These sons of God were present, conscious, rejoicing. They were not created after Adam, they were already there. But who were they? Ancient interpreters wrestled with this question. Some insisted they must have been angels, spiritual beings of light who formed the divine council. Others, particularly in Jewish mystical traditions, suggested they might have been pre-existent souls, archetypes of humanity created long before Adam was placed in the garden, awaiting their time. Still others pointed to what later theologians called the gap theory, that between Genesis 1 verse 1 and 1:2 there lies an unspoken catastrophe, a previous world destroyed, in which these beings once lived. If that is so, Adam's creation was not the first creation of rational beings, but the restart of history after a cosmic collapse. The language of Genesis itself opens the door to such mysteries. In Genesis 1 verse 26, God says, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." Who is the us? Traditional theology says this points to the Trinity. But ancient Jewish readers, long before Christian theology, often understood it differently, that God was speaking in the presence of his heavenly court, the sons of God who surrounded his throne. These were not equals to God, but they were real, conscious beings through whom divine authority and counsel flowed. Humanity, then, was not created in isolation but introduced into an already populated cosmic hierarchy. And this is where the story grows darker. Because if these beings truly preceded Adam, their history is not one of simple obedience. In Genesis 6, we encounter the most controversial account. When men began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born unto them, the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. This forbidden union produced the Nephilim, the giants of old, mighty men of renown. The early church fathers, as well as Jewish commentators like those of the Book of Enoch, insisted that these sons of God were not metaphorical, they were real beings who transgressed divine order, descending into the human realm and corrupting it. Their fall became part of the reason the flood was sent, wiping away the hybrid offspring and cleansing creation. This opens a chilling thought: the fall of Adam and Eden was not the first rebellion. It was preceded by the rebellion of these ancient sons of God. Humanity's exile from the garden was only one piece of a larger cosmic drama in which both heaven and earth were fractured by disobedience. The forbidden union in Genesis 6 might not have been an isolated event, but the continuation of a corruption that had already begun in a pre-Adamic age. Throughout Scripture, traces of these beings surface like shadows slipping between verses. In Psalm 82, God stands in the divine council and addresses them. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods he holds judgment. The word translated gods here is Elohim, the same term used for God himself, but in plural form. These are not idols, nor men, but exalted beings standing before the throne, rebuked for injustice and destined to die like mere mortals. Again, the Bible hints that Adam was not alone in the spiritual hierarchy, that humanity's creation took place within a cosmos already inhabited by older, more powerful beings now subject to judgment. Daniel, 2, describes watchers, heavenly beings who monitor the affairs of humanity, delivering decrees from the Most High. These watchers are later expanded upon in apocryphal texts like 1 Enoch, where their descent into corruption is narrated in detail. And by the time we reach Revelation, the heavenly court is once again in view, elders, living creatures, angels, and voices of praise that fill the throne room. Among them, the sons of God may still linger, their destiny entwined with humanity's final restoration. If Adam was not the first, then why was he created? Perhaps to fulfill what the sons of God had failed to complete. Perhaps humanity is God's answer to a broken heavenly order, the clay-born image-bearers who would succeed where radiant beings of fire once faltered. Humanity's weakness, far from being a flaw, may have been its very design, for in weakness, dependence upon God becomes strength. Where the sons of God, clothed in glory, fell through pride, humanity, frail, mortal, and dust-bound, was given the chance to rise through humility. The mysterious connection, then, is not simply that these beings existed before Adam, but that their story and ours are intertwined. The echoes of their rebellion shaped the world Adam inherited. Their shadow falls across Eden, across the flood, across Babel, and even across the crucifixion, where Paul reminds us in Colossians that Christ triumphed over principalities and powers, disarming them publicly. These were not abstract concepts, they were the very beings who once bore the title Sons of God, now fallen into opposition. The idea unsettles us because it means that human history is not self-contained. We are not the only characters in God's drama. Adam's story is already part 2 of a cosmic tale, and our own age may be only one act in a far greater narrative stretching back before Eden and forward beyond Revelation. The question we must ask is not simply who were the sons of God, but why was humanity created in their wake? This is the hidden mystery of creation, that Adam may not have been the first man, but the new beginning after a forgotten world. And the sons of God before him? What if the story of Adam and Eve was never the beginning, but a continuation of something far older, an echo of a world erased, a civilization of beings who walked with God before man ever touched the soil of Eden? Some traditions whisper that the sons of God were not only spectators of creation, but participants, keepers of knowledge, and rulers of a vanished age. If this is true, then humanity may have been born into a cosmic drama already unfolding long before its first breath. In the Book of Job, we are told that the sons of God shouted for joy when the foundations of the earth were laid. This detail is striking, because if they rejoiced at creation, then they already existed before creation's completion. They are not described as angels in the typical sense, nor as mortal beings, but as divine participants, watching as the universe was shaped. Ancient commentators often asked, why did God create man at all if he already had these radiant sons? One unsettling possibility is that Adam was not God's first attempt at reflection in flesh, but his second, perhaps even his final, answer to an earlier failure. Some apocryphal writings suggest that these sons of God bore a brilliance, a fire of divine essence, yet they were not incorruptible. Their fallibility may explain why their legacy became hidden, their story buried under the dust of later scriptures. The union described in Genesis 6, when the sons of God took the daughters of men, hints at a dangerous boundary crossing, as if these beings were not fully separate from humanity but able to walk between realms. The Nephilim, born of this forbidden union, stand as monuments of that breach. Giants of terrifying power, neither fully human nor fully divine, they became a living memory of a time when heaven touched earth in ways God did not intend. But the enigma goes even deeper. Some early Jewish and Christian thinkers proposed that these sons of God were not merely angels in disguise, but remnants of a pre-Adamic race, beings who had once filled the earth before it was laid waste, perhaps in a cataclysm now remembered only in fragments, such as the gap between Genesis 1 verse 1 and 1:2. According to this interpretation, the earth without form and void was not the beginning, but the aftermath of judgment. These beings, once exalted, had rebelled or faltered, and their ruin prepared the stage for Adam's creation. Humanity, in this light, was God's new image-bearer, crafted to succeed where they had failed. The Psalms preserve strange traces of their existence. God stands in the divine council, in the midst of the gods he judges. This verse reveals a heavenly assembly, a court where decisions about the earth were made. Who are these gods if not the very sons of God? Were they once entrusted with dominion, only to lose it through corruption? If so, their memory may live on in the ancient myths of other civilizations, the Titans of Greece, the Anunnaki of Mesopotamia, the shining deities of forgotten temples, all distorted recollections of the same lost reality. Daniel, too, speaks of watchers, celestial beings who descend to observe and intervene in human affairs. Their role blurs the line between guardian and judge, between messenger and ruler. And in the Book of Revelation, we glimpse their shadows still, elders who surround the throne, casting down crowns, as if they have borne authority since before Adam yet now bow before the Lamb who surpasses them. The story of the sons of God, then, is not a side note in the Bible, but a hidden thread that stretches from Genesis to Revelation. It suggests that humanity entered a universe already inhabited by older intelligences, some loyal to God, others rebellious. The fall of man may not have been the first rebellion, but the second act in a longer tragedy. The serpent in Eden, too cunning for a mere animal, may have been part of this earlier order, one of the fallen who sought to drag mankind into the same rebellion that had destroyed his own kind. If this is true, then every page of Scripture becomes more than a record of humanity's fall and redemption. It becomes a cosmic chronicle, the story of a battle that began before time was measured, between beings who were created to shine but instead chose shadow. Adam and Eve may have been the first humans, but they were not the first children of God. Others came before, and their memory haunts the foundations of our faith. And so, the question lingers, if the sons of God walked before man, and some even walk still, then perhaps humanity's destiny is not merely to survive, but to take its place in a divine order older than Eden itself. What role do we play in this forgotten war? And why has God chosen fragile flesh to carry a glory that greater beings once abandoned? What if the great rebellion in Eden was not the true beginning of human tragedy, but only the continuation of a much older fall? What if the shadow that tempted Adam and Eve was the echo of a rebellion that started long before man existed, a rebellion of the sons of God themselves? The Bible speaks of them only in fragments. Job says they shouted for joy at creation. Genesis describes them descending to take human wives. The Psalms depict them standing in the divine council, subject to judgment. Revelation hints at their presence even in the final heavenly throne room. But in between these glimpses lies the unanswered question, what became of them? Were they destroyed, transformed, or do they still linger in the unseen realms, watching humanity walk the road they once abandoned? Some traditions argue that their rebellion sealed their fate. The Book of Enoch paints a chilling image of the Watchers, 200 heavenly beings who descended to earth, taught forbidden knowledge, and fathered monstrous giants. For their crime, they were bound in chains, imprisoned in the abyss, awaiting the day of final judgment. This interpretation suggests that the sons of God became the very spirits of chaos that now oppose humanity, transformed into what later theology would call demons. If true, then humanity's struggle against sin is not only internal, it is a continuation of a war against ancient intelligences that fell long before our time. Other traditions imagine a more subtle survival. They suggest that some of these beings retain influence, ruling unseen over nations and kingdoms. The prophet Daniel describes a mysterious prince of Persia who resisted an angelic messenger for 21 days until Michael, one of the chief princes, came to assist. This strange passage implies that powerful spiritual rulers govern regions of the earth, shaping history behind the veil. If these are remnants of the sons of God, then their story is not finished. They continue to haunt the human world as powers and principalities. Paul echoes this in Ephesians when he warns that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against rulers of the darkness of this world. These are not idle metaphors. They are a reminder that humanity's greatest struggles are not merely political or personal, but spiritual, rooted in conflicts older than history itself. Every war, every corruption, every seduction of power may be the fingerprints of beings who once stood in God's presence but chose instead to rival His will. But there is also hope hidden in this story. Psalm 8 declares that man, though made a little lower than the heavenly beings, has been crowned with glory and honor, given dominion over the works of God's hands. What the sons of God once abandoned, humanity was created to inherit. This is why the fall of Adam was such a devastating blow, not only because it fractured humanity, but because it risked forfeiting the very place God had prepared for man in the cosmic order. And this is where the mystery of Christ shines most brightly. Paul calls him the last Adam, the one who succeeds where the first failed. In his life, death, and resurrection, Jesus did not merely redeem mankind, He triumphed over the ancient powers. Colossians 2 verse 15 proclaims that he disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame, triumphing over them by the cross. In other words, the rebellion of the sons of God was answered not with another army of celestial fire, but with the humility of the Son of Man nailed to wood. In that weakness, God overturned the pride of heaven's fallen sons. This means the story of the sons of God before Adam is not just an ancient curiosity. It is a mirror held up to our own destiny. They remind us that power without obedience leads to ruin. They warn us that glory without humility collapses into pride. They show us that the cosmos itself is not empty but alive with spiritual forces still contending for influence. And they reveal that humanity's role is far greater than survival. We are called to step into the inheritance they abandoned, to rule and reign not through rebellion, but through faithfulness. The ultimate question remains: do they still watch us? Are they shadows at the edges of history, stirring ambition, whispering pride, tempting mankind to repeat their fall? Or have they been bound, silenced, awaiting judgment at the end of time? The Bible leaves us with mystery, perhaps deliberately, so that faith, not certainty, guides us. But this much is clear: Adam was not alone in creation. Before him, there were others. They shouted for joy at the foundations of the earth. They rebelled, they fell, they left scars on the world and on the heavens themselves. And now, their memory lingers as both warning and invitation. Humanity's story is not isolated, it is part of a cosmic drama that began before Eden and will end only when all things are restored under Christ, the true Son of God. So when we ask, who are the sons of God before Adam, the answer is both awe and terror. They were beings of light who became shadows. They were rulers who became prisoners. They were sons who became exiles. And perhaps, in some unseen way, they are still among us. The question is no longer who they were, but who we will become. Will humanity follow the path of rebellion, repeating the pride of those ancient sons? Or will we embrace humility, carrying the image of God as it was always meant to shine? The sons of God before Adam remind us that the stakes are cosmic, the drama eternal, and the choice, ours.